Hey everyone, this is Mike from Comic Book Trove here today with a couple of my favourite books in my collection actually. These are the two Daredevil by Frank Miller omnibuses. What I've got over here on this side is the main run, the Daredevil by Frank Miller and Klaus Janson omnibus. That's Miller's full original run on Daredevil. I've already covered that on the channel in the past, in the last few months. It's been a little while now, but having already looked at that book, I wanted to shift focus and take a look at the companion omnibus today, which collects a few different stories from Frank Miller, which he wrote over the years when returning to the series and the character after this original run. So I'm going to dive into the book today, showcase it, discuss some of my thoughts, and maybe help you to gain a little bit of insight as to whether or not it's a book you'd be interested in picking up at some point if you don't already have it and you've been wondering about it. So without any further ado, let's shift focus to showcasing the book now and see what this is all about. Okay then, so here we are with the Daredevil by Frank Miller Companion Omnibus. Now, I just want to mention, before I really get into looking into this book in any more detail, I do think that this book is now out of print at the time I've been making this video, which I know would be understandably frustrating for anybody who's trying to find a copy of it and struggling to do so. However, it has been confirmed that there will be a reprint of the Daredevil by Frank Miller and Klaus Janson Omnibus in 2023, so I have to think, therefore, that it's probably just a matter of when, not if, this book also gets another reprint announcement, because it would be very strange, in my opinion, for them to re-release that main Miller book and not this companion when the two work so well together as a set. But let's take a look at this book anyway and just showcase it off. What I really liked about this book was the design of the actual dust jacket and the hardcover itself when they released it last time around. I really liked this black and red style that they went for, and it looks really cool all the way around the dust jacket. And it's also, interestingly, along with the other Daredevil by Frank Miller book and the Elektra by Frank Miller omnibus, they are, as far as I'm aware, the only three Marvel books that have this Marvel Omnibus logo down at the bottom of the spine as opposed to the top, which certainly makes them quite interesting and it makes them stand out amongst other books. But it does mean that they look kind of weird if you put them amongst your other Marvel omnibuses, and I personally choose to keep them separately just because it looks a little bit weird. The spine designs are very cool together when you look at them side by side, but they look very strange because they're very different to basically every other Marvel omnibus. So yeah, I think that they're going to change that though. With the next printing of this book, the Frank Miller omnibus, I believe that they're going with different dust cover designs, so I wouldn't be surprised at all if it looks like more of a conventional Marvel omnibus and they put the logo at the top on the next printing. And therefore I expect they might well do the same with this if they reprint it again. But underneath the book, we've got this really nice image again, you know, with this red on black background. Looks really nice. Various different images. There's a really good one here on the back with Daredevil and Karen Page, taken from, I think that was a trade paperback cover for the Born Again storyline, which is collected in here and is really a highlight of the book, has to be said. And on that note, before we get into the book any further, let me just give a spoiler warning for the various different stories collected in this companion omnibus. There's a few different things, but the three main stories are Daredevil Born Again, there's a graphic novel called Daredevil Love and War, and then we've got Daredevil The Man Without Fear, which was a 5-issue miniseries. So everything pretty much written by Frank Miller, with the exception of the first couple of issues, which are a couple of spectacular Spider-Man issues, issues 27 and 28 of that series. Everything else then is written by Frank Miller with artwork by different artists. So you get a nice introduction here from Ralph Macchio before diving into the content. And as I said, we kick things off with really kind of a bonus inclusion. We get 2 issues of Spectacular Spider-Man here, which guest starred Daredevil. And these were guest penciled at the time by Frank Miller, whilst being written by Bill Mantlo. And I think the reason that these are in here is, firstly, it's just a nice bonus inclusion, as I mentioned, but this was also, I believe, the first time that Frank Miller ever drew Daredevil, as he was appearing in this story. So it's quite a cool bit of trivia and a nice thing to include in this book as a companion omnibus, because, you know, it is very deliberately labelled as a companion. It's not a volume 2, even though you possibly could have called it a volume 2, but no, this is very much a companion, so it's a lot of miscellaneous stuff, really. It's basically everything that Frank Miller did on Daredevil that isn't collected in that original run in the other main omnibus. Including this one-off issue here, Daredevil issue 219. So this is quite an interesting story called Badlands, written by Frank Miller, artwork by John Buscema. And this is an interesting story which doesn't actually feature Daredevil. It features Matt Murdock, and he's kind of going to this small town and just kind of going around trying to help out because things have been going quite wrong in this town. And yes, it's a really interesting story because we don't see Matt in costume at any point as Daredevil. But he's just being very mysterious and just being a kind of, I don't know, like the mysterious figure who walks into town, does a good deed and vanishes, never to be seen again. It's that kind of story. But then we get into the bulk of what this book is really. The standout story for me, which really starts with issue 227, but we get issue 226 here. This is a story which features the Gladiator, kind of a classic villain from the Silver Age of Daredevil comics. And this again, written by Frank Miller, but really just serves as, I don't know, like a bit of a preface really to the main story which we're about to see begin here. The main chunk of what's in this book, I think. Overall, it's the Daredevil Born Again story, which runs through issue 227, so starts here and goes up to, I believe, issue 233 by the time it's fully complete. Now, this is a really good story. Now, Marvel have just recently announced, and within the MCU, they're going to be doing what I assume is an adaptation of this, because there's going to be a Daredevil Born Again Disney Plus series. So I would assume they're going to be drawing inspiration from this source material and taking elements of this story and adapting it. We will see how good of a job they do, because this is really, in my opinion, and I'm sure others feel the same way, just one of the absolute best Daredevil stories that there's ever been. Now, a bit of a spoiler warning, I don't want to get into this and discuss the entire story, but I'll discuss some key stuff and show off the story, obviously, as I go through it. So, from here on out, if you haven't read Born Again or the other stories in here, just fair warning that I might give some spoilery stuff as I talk about them. But what this story is basically about, the premise is that Karen Page, the former love interest of Matt Murdock, who at this point had been absent from the series for quite a long time, she has, let's say, to say the very least, she's down on her luck. She's become a drug addict, and in order to secure a next fix of drugs, she has sold out Matt Murdock and revealed his secret identity. And that information makes its way to the Kingpin, who proceeds to systematically use his influence and his contacts within different government agencies and I don't know, everywhere that he's got officials in his pocket, to destroy Matt Murdock's life piece by piece, to just tear him apart. He makes him lose his job, he makes him lose his home, discredits and ruins him financially and socially, and does his absolute best to drive him mad, and really initially succeeds. You know, we see great artwork in here by David Mazzucchelli, who just does an absolutely fantastic job on this particular story. Really good artwork throughout here, really strong stuff. See pages like this of the Kingpin just basking in the glory of his work in trying to bring this guy down, Matt Murdock, and just ruin his life. It's a really kind of heartbreaking story, you know, very emotional at points. We see not only is Matt Murdock's entire life coming apart around him, seemingly with him unable to do a single thing about it to stop it, but then we've got you know, Karen Page being reintroduced to the series. We've got her struggles with trying to recover from her drug addiction. And what I really like throughout this book as well, I've got to mention before I forget, at the beginning of, I think, every issue in this story, there's an opening splash page like this from Mazzucchelli, where we see Daredevil, his situation, in a panel basically that reflects his situation getting gradually worse before then starting to improve again ultimately. Because, you know, the whole story, the title, the Born Again concept, is really this idea of him losing everything and having to try and regain it, you know, to reassess his life, his priorities, and to try and ultimately come back stronger. And that's really what this story is about, but it's just told so well. It's just fantastically well written by Frank Miller, got to be said. This is really, I think, some of Miller's best ever work, not just on Daredevil, but in general. Such a strong story, really iconic stuff. I love, I mean, it's really continuing thematically on from what Miller had done already in his original run on Daredevil, where he really starts to explore the kind of nitty-gritty crime of New York and the way that characters like the Kingpin and organised criminals like that have got their fingers in so many pies and controlling things through different corrupt ways. It's really interesting stuff, and I think it's all explored really well. So, you know, by this point in the story, we've got Matt Murdock has pretty much lost everything. You know, as I say, he's lost his home, his job, all of his money, It's all gone. We get another one of those opening splash pages here, which really sees him having hit rock bottom, you know, just sleeping on the streets at this point. He's basically got nothing left at all. And it takes a huge toll on him, you know, psychologically. We see him lashing out, getting just uncontrollable fits of anger. Yeah, really, really quite dark story, to be honest. Very mature story. He ultimately gets found by this character here. I won't reveal exactly who she is, but she's a character who turns out to have quite an important connection to him. Another one of those great splash pages here, honestly, like issue by issue. I think that this is one of the coolest parts of this story, just these different splash pages that Mazzucchelli does. This one being really kind of very borderline religious imagery, you know. I don't even know if I'd describe it as borderline. It is really quite religious, that one, you know. And the whole born again thing obviously being Christian terminology. And Catholicism being an important part of Matt Murdock's life as well. You know, especially, I think, established by Frank Miller. But we start to see Karen Page makes it back to New York. Ultimately, at this point, Matt Murdock starts to gradually recover, starts to piece his life together a little bit. He doesn't really get back to exactly where he was by the end of this story. But certainly he fights back against everything that's been done to him, and it ends up being really quite a very good comeback story. Let me know, though, what you think of Born Again, because honestly, this is just really great stuff to me. Just some of the very best Daredevil storytelling there's ever been. I would love to hear whether you agree with that, whether you hold this story in equally high regard, or if you don't really like it so much, maybe you think it's overrated. You know, I'm happy to hear people who've got different opinions on this stuff, and just to hear your thoughts on it, why you like it, why you don't like it, anything in between. But this is a really nice page here with Karen finally reuniting with Matt. She kind of breaks down, confesses to him that she's the reason that he lost everything. And he basically just forgives her and takes her back in and wants to just care for her initially, you know, try and help her with kicking the drug habit and picking things up from there. But then we get this really kind of crazy character here, this character called Nuke, who has the US flag on his face. At this point, Kingpin has kind of become really obsessed with just killing Matt Murdock because he's really frustrated that Murdock has refused to give in and die. So he kind of just escalates things and hires this crazy dude, this mercenary, to just go in and cause havoc and try and kill Matt. And because this guy just starts causing absolute chaos and destruction, we get the involvement of some other characters. I think most notably Captain America comes into the story. And Cap, we see him here. Really good page there, fantastic. Final splash page for that issue, 232. Before we move into 233, where as you can see on the cover, Captain America, he gets involved here. And he's quite disturbed by this Nuke character because of the the US flag thing on his face, the apparent patriotism that this character's got. It strikes a chord in the kind of wrong way with Cap. It just disturbs him on a different level. So he kind of does a bit of investigation into where this character has come from and uncovers a couple of secrets about him. Very cool kind of finale to the story. The way it all ends, I think, is very good. And all in all, like I say, in my opinion, a near perfect story, this one. I really, really think it's very good. Really, really good. Not least of all because it actually ends on quite a happy ending. You know, Daredevil, Matt Murdock, he goes through hell in this story, but he comes through it all. Kingpin gets a bit of comeuppance, and Matt gets kind of a happy ending as well, with Karen Page on the road to recovery. And that's quite nice to see, you know. I mean, call me a bit of a, I don't know, a hopeless romantic or something, but it's just quite nice of a way to end that story, I think. I'm a bit of a sucker for a happy ending, what can I say? But then we move into this story. Now, this is my least favourite thing in this book. Somebody might strongly disagree with me, I know. But this is the Love and War graphic novel written by Frank Miller. Artwork here by Bill Sienkiewicz. And what I'll just say is, I think one of my least favourite stories that I've ever read in comics is Elektra Assassin, which is by this same creative team, Miller and Sienkiewicz. Just one of the most nonsensical and weird stories I've ever read in my life. And this story is basically the same as that. It's very much the same art style by Sienkiewicz. And you know what? I like some of Bill Sienkiewicz's work. You know, I really like his work on New Mutants, on Moon Knight. I think that's some really great stuff. But the stuff he's doing here in this book, which by the way is a story focusing on the Kingpin really more than Daredevil. This work though, it's just a bit too abstract. It's too experimental. It's a bit too out there for me. Not a style that really resonates with me particularly. I just find it quite visually confusing. Yeah, not too sure what more to say. I mean, again, let me know what you think about this. If you really like this style, then absolutely fair enough, you know. Feel free to tell me why you like it, or let me know if you agree with me and just think that this is very strange stuff that, I don't know, just doesn't really do it for me. So I kind of struggled to read through that story last time I read it. It was a real bit of a drag, just because I just could not get into the art style at all. It took me out of the story too much. So for me, that is unfortunately the low point of this omnibus, the weakest thing collected in here. But then we move on to this, which is another real highlight, another really good story. I don't think it's quite as good as Born Again, but this is the Man Without Fear 5-issue miniseries, which tells basically an expanded origin story for Matt Murdock, detailing different parts of his early life, basically from his childhood up until really officially becoming Daredevil for the first time. So, you know, get a lot of familiar story beats if you're familiar with Matt Murdock's backstory. You know, you get a lot of that here. So his backstory with living with his dad. His daddy was a boxer and wanted more for Matt and insisted he study and try and work hard to get a better life than he did. And then his dad's tragic death, you know, the accident obviously that blinds Matt. We also get interactions between Matt and this character here, Stick, who effectively served as a kind of mentor for Matt in allowing him to come to grips with his blindness and his now other heightened senses. Stick was a character who had been introduced by Frank Miller in his original run. So if you'd already read that run, you'd be familiar with him from there. And this story really just expands on the background with those two characters and their interactions with each other. Probably my favourite part of this though is Elektra's introduction, and we see Matt meet Elektra in college. Also worth mentioning the artwork in here by John Romita Jr., whose artwork in general is not amongst my favourite. You know, I'd say Romita Jr. not one of my favourite artists overall, but his work on this particular story here, I think it is really nice for the most part. And this is kind of like, this is from the sort of early to mid 90s, this story, which is pretty much around the era right before Romita Jr.'s art style started to become really, how I can only really describe as very blocky and weird looking, kind of what it's looked like for the last sort of 20 or so years. He didn't quite have that style here. This is a bit, I guess a bit better in my opinion than what he's been doing in more recent years. But it's just a really good story and a really good exploration of, you know, Matt's early life. And quite a bit of this, I think, was adapted into the Daredevil Netflix series. For example, the stuff here where we see him running around in, you know, dressed in black. That's pretty much how he started at the beginning of the Netflix show, if I remember that rightly. And as I say, we get some of his earliest interactions with Elektra here as well, who, again, was another Frank Miller creation. Really, just some of the best elements of Daredevil, I think, came from Frank Miller's work, quite honestly. I just think that it's hard to understate how big of a job Frank Miller did, how much contributions he made to really reinventing this character and just shifting him in a, you know, in my opinion, a much better direction than where he'd been in the pre-Frank Miller years. But this is highly recommended as well. You know, even if you can't get a hold of this omnibus, I definitely recommend that you check out both Daredevil Born Again and The Man Without Fear. Both well worth reading in my opinion. You could probably skip Love and War. But we also get some stuff here with the Kingpin in here as well. Very cool. But yeah, like I say, just highly recommended stuff, both these stories, Born Again, Man Without Fear. The two best stuff in this book, the two best reasons to own this book and to get these in oversized format. But as I say, any way that you can read them, it is well worth doing so. And then, you know, moving to the back, there's quite a lot of extras in here, quite a few different pages of script. Got a Daredevil Born Again trade paperback cover. Yep, that's what I thought that image was taken from. And yeah, various other different artwork, pieces of artwork and covers. It's quite a large extras section actually in this one. But yes, so happy to hear your thoughts. Let me know what you think of this companion omnibus and the material collected in here. Yeah, just as I've already said, always happy to hear the thoughts of others. Definitely a book that, as I say, is well worth checking out. Goes together really well with the other Daredevil book. As I mentioned, there is also an Elektra by Frank Miller omnibus. I had that at one point, really disliked it to the point of selling it. Just couldn't get into that one whatsoever. So yeah, I've not had that for quite a long time now, so I won't be able to cover it on the channel unless I somehow end up with it again, but I highly doubt that, to be honest. But definitely really cool to look through a lot of these scripts here as well. You know, it's not many books that give you this much script material to kind of look through the way it was originally written up. So that is definitely very cool. And you know, you get a few various other bits of material as well, you know, the pin-ups, the bits of artwork that you typically get, usually anyway, in the back of most omnibuses. But anyway, that is basically that. That's the companion Daredevil Omnibus by Frank Miller. Yeah, as I say, just to echo myself for probably the, I don't know how many time at this point, just a really good book, really well worth checking out. Hopefully it's been useful and insightful to take a look through it there and maybe helped you get a better idea of what's in this book. And yeah, as always, thanks as always for watching. If you've made it this far through the video, I really appreciate that. And I'll be back again soon to discuss something else.